So, good morning. My name is Diana Cummings. I'm a senior psychology major, and today I am going to present my research proposal for cognitive independence and flow. To begin with, flow was first defined by Csikszentmihalyi in his text, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, first published in 1990. Flow was defined as an optimal state of mind, or the highest level of happiness. He outlined certain criteria that must be met in order to obtain flow. The first being that the individual must feel cognitively efficient, they must be deeply involved and highly motivated. The perceived challenge and skills need to meet while also being relatively high. And also in retrospect, the experience needs to be perceived as enjoyable. In 1996, Moneta and Csikszentmihalyi found that challenge and skill were positively correlated with the quality of one's experience. They established general conditions in which flow occurs. Flow occurs when an individual has control over their consciousness. The individual must also become so involved in an activity that they lose all sense of time and self. In order for this to happen, an individual must not perceive the activity as a means to an end, rather be motivated intrinsically. The outcome of reaching flow through these conditions is the development of a more complex self. The second major construct of interest in my proposal is cognitive independence. Cognitive independence is someone who thinks for themselves. They must formulate their own beliefs, opinions, and decisions based on their own personal knowledge, research, and validation. Theoretically, then, the opposite of cognitive independence is cognitive conformity. Cognitive conformity is basing one's beliefs, opinions, and decisions on what someone else has told them. An example of both cognitive approaches to the same problem can be useful to understanding the concepts. For instance, in career choice, someone who demonstrates cognitive independence will assess their own skills and research jobs that fit their findings. This takes more effort of the individual, it can be more time-consuming, and therefore overall more challenging. While someone who addresses the same problem from a cognitive conformist approach would choose a job because their parents want them to, or simply because they're expected to follow into the family business, or to fulfill anyone else's expectations. This is much easier. It's easier to follow a preset path, there's no job search struggles, and they don't have to face rejection. In order to be cognitively independent, a person must think in a complex manner, which is typically a challenging task. Challenge comes from approaching the situation in novel and unique ways, which allows the skills to develop. In doing so, an individual gains control over their consciousness, which will allow them to obtain flow. Therefore, I predicted that the participants primed for cognitive independence would be more likely to achieve flow. A perceived challenge and a coinciding perception of adequate skills are criteria for obtaining the flow state, which are also evident in those who think independently. In order to measure cognitive independence, it had to be primed as a state variable. Cognitive independence is my independent variable, and there are two levels of this independent variable, cognitive independence and cognitive conformity. Cognitive conformity was labeled as conventional thinker on the activity handouts in order to control for any negative connotation with the word conformist. Flow is the dependent variable. I first primed each participant for either cognitive independence or cognitive conformity. All activities were the same, with the only variation being the description of either cognitive independence or cognitive conformity. But for the sake of explanation, I will review the primes only labeled cognitive independent. The first activity asked the participants to read a description of their state and write a personal experience. The second asked the participants to list situations in which they thought cognitive independence would be beneficial. And the third asked the participants to deal with a situation from a cognitively independent point of view. The first and third activity asked the participants to spend approximately 10 minutes completing, and the second only specified for 5. For a second, I'd like to take you into a bit more detail about activity 3. Here, I asked the participants to practice thinking as an independent or conformist thinker. I created a prompt in which the university was considering the addition of more foreign language classes. I listed possible benefits and possible downfalls, and then asked the participants to indicate whether they were in favor or opposed to the proposition. But no worries, I debriefed them all and let them know that the proposal was bogus. After they completed the first part, I asked the participants to imagine being on a 7-person committee, where 5 disagreed and 1 was neutral. They were then to write out how thinking independently would affect their behavior in the situation. The purpose of these activities was to put participants in either a cognitive independent or cognitive conformist mind frame. Once all the activities were completed, I asked them 2 more questions. These were on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all and 5 being very much. The first question assessed how challenged the individual felt during activity 3, and the second question assessed the perception of their skills to match this challenge of activity 3. I recently finished collecting data. There were 109 participants, all of whom were Wingate University students. And I'm currently running the data analysis, which at first glance looks to need 2 t-tests. There will be 2 t-tests on each level of the independent variable. Again, the independent variables will be cognitive independence and cognitive conformity. The first assesses each level of the independent variable in relation to the challenges, and the second assesses each independent variable in relation to skills. I expect to find that cognitive independence will significantly predict both measures of flow, which will indicate that cognitive independence is a means to flow, while cognitive conformity is predicted to be negatively related to flow. In conclusion, I hope to demonstrate a route to obtaining flow while also creating a better understanding of the concept in general. I also hope to establish a way in which one can increase the occurrences of flow in their daily lives. Applying my potential findings would be, a way to apply my potential findings would be to investigate the connection between cognitive independence as a trait and the autotelic personality. The autotelic personality has theoretically been linked to flow, and it would be interesting to demonstrate cognitive independence as a trait of the autotelic personality, since they both lead to flow. Any questions? Go ahead, Adam.
What is an autotelic personality?
Okay, an autotelic personality has not been clearly defined. Csikszentmihalyi talks about it in his text, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. He talks about the autotelic person, the autotelic self, the autotelic job, and then the autotelic as a personality. And how he states it is that it is the autotelic personality, his definition is allows an individual to achieve the state more often. That's it. I looked everywhere to find a more, and there's also, I found a research study where it talks about, I think Asakwa was his name, and he did a research on Japanese students where he defined the autotelic personality as students who achieve flow more often. And that was about as far as I could define it. So, go ahead.
Last night I was working on my
Go ahead.
work on flow for personality class, and I think I came across a definition of autotelic that might give you a little bit more, but I need to review over what I have to make sure it was.
Yeah, I found some pretty good definitions of just the word autotelic,
Right,
but nothing in combination with personality.
And this one is presumably just that, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
I know that it's been hard. I've just asked Dr. Turnell, I said, who exactly came up with that?
Which
Because
the
that was,
definition of autotelic I found was dealing with independence,
Sure.
which led me to the indication that independent thinking would be relative.
That makes sense. And I mean, and if I remember right, is it a positive psychology book, Shane Lopez, 2005, I want to say, and it was in the chapter with flow, mindfulness.
Conscientiousness, all that,
exactly.
yes.
So I'll look it over again. And,
Yeah, send it this way.
Refer that to you. But my main question was, how are it that you're measuring flow?
We're measuring flow with, with 2 levels, well, 2 questions. One is just simply ask the individual to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 how they perceive the challenge of the third activity, which is where I put them in the state of thinking in either manner. And then the second question assessed the skills, if they thought they had the adequate skills to meet that challenge. If those 2 meet, then it's defined as flow.
That makes a lot of sense. As far as we know, there's not a flow scale out there.
Couldn't find one.
Yeah.
I even checked some of Csikszentmihalyi's work himself, and he measured flow through, it was a longitudinal study where he had a beeper where he'd page them and then they would have to write down a list, and being here, that was, in the time constraints, that wasn't really.
No.
But that was his, and I couldn't find, I couldn't find the actual discussion or methods part where he talked about how he even analyzed that, like what test he ran on it, but.
When you used that experience sampling method that you're talking about and you paged participants, what questions were the participants, what types of questions
Okay, they were asked, what are you doing at this very moment? How happy do you feel at this moment? How would you define happiness at this moment? Things like that.
Did he ask about challenge and skill?
Yes, he did. I'm sure. I'm 100% sure. Yes, he did. He asked, "Do you feel challenged in the whatever you're doing at this moment?"
Because passionate factor would surprise me a little bit as a question, more than I would think challenge.
And he definitely does ask
I can see that
happiness,
there, but,
and he also asks how they define happiness for themselves at that moment, which I thought was interesting. So, because it could vary from, I guess, is why I would ask that question. Any other questions? Okay. And a special thanks to Dr. Trindle and Dr. Fiorella for all of their help and labor.